Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar from Infopro Learning. We're going to look at priorities versus business outcomes, determining success in L&D without jobs. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have some people funneling in here. We'll allow them to join and catch up. They'll skip the housekeeping, but that's not extremely relevant anyways. For those of you that are not familiar with the GoToWebinar platform, it's a bit different than others you might have used. The primary difference is there's no live chat between the audience. Most of the chat is on the direction, or is one directional. We ask that do please feel free to share your chat, your thoughts, your ideas, and your questions, all using the questions tab. When you open that tab up on the right hand side, you'll see the ability there to write a question. And then that allows us as the hosts to go through there periodically and answer them. If it's an answer that I can take fairly easily, sometimes you'll get a text reply, but also usually if we see two or three of the same questions come in, I'll ask Sherry to answer those in real time. So please do feel free to write your notes and write your comments and your questions as we go through the webinar using the questions pane, and we'll get to them throughout the webinar. Anything we don't have time or we have to skip over, we'll come to at the end in a dedicated Q&A session. The number one question that we get asked all the time is this going to be recorded? Yes, it is. We're already started the recording of the webinar. This will be shared with you traditionally 2 days after the webinar ends. So look for this in your inbox on Monday, Tuesday at the latest. For this webinar. And with that, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. A little bit about Infopro Learning, who this company is. And we've been in this business for, I think, over 30 years now, I guess, is the total count. And really, if there's a lot you can read on this slide, and I'm not going to read it all. I think the best way to sum it up is our primary focus is working with large enterprise organizations to solve any of their employee development needs. This could be anything from leadership training to content development to something like LMS administration. We are a full service company, predominantly working with those companies who are looking for an end-to-end solution provider to say, I need a little bit of help across the board, and I'd like to find a good strategic thought leader who can come in and add some insight and add some value on top of the ideas that I have within my organization, while also being a very strong execution arm to deliver on that. So that's a little bit about Infopro Learning. And that's really, if you have more questions about Infopro Learning, our website's the best way to learn more about us at infoprolearning.com. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sherry. Now, I hope that nobody is watching the Masters alongside this webinar. We're expecting your full attention, and I don't think baseball started yet, but we realize today is a very special sports day between the Masters starting and opening day for baseball. We appreciate you spending an hour with us. Of undivided attention, I hope, and then you can get back to the sports right after this. With that, Sherry, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nolan, and it's a pleasure to have everybody here today. So this slide is just a little bit about me. It's always tricky when you're doing a webinar for people that you don't necessarily know, and it's nice to be able to get to know a little bit about the person that you're talking to and what their background is. So my best way of describing myself is I'm a recovering art major. I was actually an art teacher for many years in the beginning of my career, and it's that creativity and that energy is something that I really tried to continue as I moved into instructional design, account management, and now in my role as a client success VP, I'm really focused on creative solutions for our customers. That's really going to start to embed throughout this entire presentation as we talk about creative solutions to what does work without jobs look like. So I'm very excited for this session today. On a personal level, you do actually see a couple of little tidbits about me. So I love 5K races. I don't like anything more than 5K races, maybe a 4-miler here and there, but really I like that whole 5K kind of destination. Since I started working from home in the past year or two, That is my coworker, Abby. So she is typically by my side, although right now I'm actually on business travel. So I miss that little munchkin quite a bit. I do love to travel, and I also love to support a dog rescue. So there you see, and that's the face I make every time I pick up a puppy. And it's just a great rescue to be able to help dogs find homes. And so my job is to take them off the truck and walk them a little bit and then send them on to their forever home. So it's a super exciting passion of mine. But with that, you came here to hear about work without jobs, not all about me. So let's dive right in. So with all of the robotics that are coming into play in the manufacturing space, all of the automation that's coming in from a technology space, a lot of people are talking now about work without jobs. And what is going to happen to our traditional business model of you hire an individual, that person has a job description. Those are the tasks that they're going to be able to complete. They're going to get a project all to themselves and complete it from end to end. And what happens when that's not really the best solution anymore? So I will say that immediately when I heard about this topic, I kind of flashed to the TV show Battlestar Galactica and how they created these robots that, took over the world and, had a lot of really challenging seasons with them and fights and all sorts of stuff. And that's not what we're talking about today. Oftentimes, unless you're in a manufacturing facility, the robots and the automation are something that you don't even see. A lot of times it's technology. A lot of times it's things behind the scenes doing tasks that an individual, it's not really worth their time to do anymore. So a perfect example would be intermediary time card approvals. You can have a bot do that. If it's something where there is a formal check by a human at a later date who's going to make sure that that's accurate. But in the meantime, if we're just kind of checking a box, let's have a robot do that. So a lot of times in processes, that's going to be something. A big change in the L&D industry has been narration. And so a lot of times, instead of using a voiceover artist, instead we'll use machine narration. That comes with its own set of challenges of trying to get pronunciations correct. But again, it's where we've started to be able to drive some efficiencies, to drive some cost efficiencies. But it's not going to result in empty offices full of robots, sadly sipping empty cups of coffee, charging their ports in the cafeteria where we all used to have lunch. What it really means is us being more efficient with our time. It means us thinking about the work that we typically do, the value that we can add to an organization, and maybe the tasks and the parts of our job that are above or below our skill set. So some of the routine type of work, work that could be delegated somewhere else, work that could be handled by a machine or automation. It's thinking about that and just having everybody really being their most productive self every day. And so it really just kind of shifts what we do and how we define our day-to-day work. When I started thinking about this topic, I started actually flashing back from an L&D perspective, because this is not actually something new for us in L&D. I remember back in 2009, I had one of my first customers who was going to moving from having an internal learning and development department to using us as a vendor. And that's the exact process that we went to. So if you think about the previous way L&D was, and some organizations are still very much like this, you had individual instructional designers who worked for you. Those instructional designers would meet with the customer. They would do the outline of what the course was going to look like. They would do the storyboard. They would go into Articulate or some of the other softwares. They would build it themselves. A lot of times they would record their own narration. They would publish it. They would send it to the customer, and they would be that end-to-end shop. Now, when our customers approach us and say, we're looking for your team to support, this concept of work without jobs and breaking things into tasks is exactly what vendors have been doing for years. So instead of having that one person who's responsible for the end-to-end creation of a product, we have a project manager who meets with the customer and does all of the customer liaison. We have an instructional designer who does the storyboarding of it. We have development team that actually puts all the parts and pieces together. We have graphic artists who build those graphics and build those templates. We have quality assurance who reviews things. We have narrators who put those together. So when I think about this topic, it's actually something that's not new in L&D at all. It's really something that we've been doing for many years, just under a different name. So when I was in that engagement, I remember us having this huge wall in the conference room, and we had the end-to-end process. We had one of the instructional designers come in and map out their end-to-end process of what they typically do. And it was pretty much a decision of his, hers, and mine, or ours rather, where we decided what things were they going to continue to do, what things were we going to take over, and what things were we going to do together. And really the biggest change that we had to go through was helping people through that migration of your job is changing. And so that's really where we're going to spend some time today, is thinking about the impacts of what happens when you move in that direction. Now, I will say that that solution isn't for everybody. There are certain situations in which you might not want to move in that direction. And that's where we're spending all of our time today, is really making sure that when you make the decision to move to more task-based jobs instead of specifically defined job roles, that you're making the right choice for you. And so I want you to kind of imagine this to be like a little bit of like a boxing match or something, because we're going to put two different concepts against each other, and we're going to talk about the pros and cons. So, if you have any questions or thoughts inside of the chat that you want to share, feel free to do that, and Nolan can kind of chime in. But let's get started to look at some of these items. So one of the biggest things that we talk about, and that is really talked about quite a bit right now, is whether we have an internal talent or whether we have gig workers. And just to kind of define those gig workers, that means that if I have a specific task, I'm going to hire somebody just for that specific task. I'm not necessarily going to hire them for 40 hours a week. I might hire them just for a specific line item. Like I might hire an instructional designer to help me do a storyboard. I might hire a graphic artist to design some graphics for me. But that person's not going to become, it's not like when you work with a vendor and you have an auxiliary team who's supporting you. This is really talking about a company deciding, am I going to have an internal team of people, or am I just going to kind of hire people at will as I need for different tasks? So when you move to that gig worker concept, it means that there's only work for those people when there's work that needs to be done. So if you don't have work for them, they're not working for you, and you're not providing them any hours, they're not communicating with you. It's really just when there's work available. That means that they're going to manage their own schedules and their timelines. They can select tasks that they want to do, and they can also opt out of tasks that they perhaps don't want to do. You can, there's some benefits too. You can swap them out if you need to, and there's a lot of talents to be able to choose from. When you think about internal talents, those are your people. So you're going to pay them regardless of whether you have work or not. But you're also going to be able to manage their schedule and their timelines to make sure that everything that you need gets done when it needs to get done. It's sad to say, but they don't have a choice. You give them a task and they're going to need to do that because that's their job responsibility. So that's just something to consider, is there's really not a whole lot of declining a task that you don't like. There is a lengthy hiring and firing process that sometimes we need to deal with from an internal talent perspective. Sometimes there's challenges with headcount and things like that. But the biggest challenge, I think, is that one person must fit a variety of roles. So in the next screen, what I want you to be able to do is to think through, and we have these sliders right in the middle. On the left-hand side is a scorecard of how you might be feeling. Let's say that you want to be able to control when a project is worked on and when it's completed. So that's the type of thing where you want to know exactly, you want to be able to book people by the hour. Specifically, I want you working from Monday from 8 to 5. I want you working Tuesday from 8 to 4. That's what we're talking about from a level of control. If that's the type of engagement that you're looking for, a gig worker is going to be very much a challenge for you. You're not going to be able to call the shots nearly as much as you would with internal talent. And so it's just something, it's not necessarily a reason not to use it, but it is something to be aware of some of those control mechanisms that you might be giving up. If you want to be able to reduce the cost of your project and maximize your spend, gig workers are going to be great for you. That's going to allow you to, if you have a instructional design task that needs to get done, you can hire an instructional designer, but you're not then using that same person to do some of the lower level tasks like incorporating narration or things like that. If you want your team to be able to grow and shrink based on demand, gig workers, again, is going to be great for you because you can kind of bring them in and push them out as you need to. So it's just based on supply and demand instead of having a team that you're going to need to be able to manage. If you want to have a variety of team members, each with a specific skill set or proficiencies, gigs workers is definitely for you because you can have a whole network that you're able to rely on without having to commit to those individuals for 40 hours a week. And then last, if you want to be able to achieve your project deadlines, it kind of meets in the middle. You can do it both ways. You can do it with an internal team. You can do it with gig workers. It's just a level of effort and control for the most part that you're going to be giving up from a standpoint of a schedule, from a communication. You know, those are some of the things that you might experience with gig workers rather than having your own team. So as you think through these options, you know, we're going to go into the next set. So as we look at two other options that you might look for, internal learning and development versus vendor partnerships. When you have an internal L&D department, they're aligned to you, to your corporate ethos and vision and what you're looking for. You're able to work with them to be able to prioritize your projects and make sure that everything that you need to get done gets done. The only downside is that you're limited to that experience of what those individuals have. If you work with vendor partners, on the other hand, they do need to be onboarded to your line of thinking and what your voice is for your organization. They are going to be working with multiple customers potentially, unless you have a dedicated team. So you do have to kind of have an understanding that you might be sharing them with other clients as well. But they are going to bring with you, as a result of that, a breadth of experience and how things are done in other industries or with other customers that you might be able to benefit from as well. So as we look at the scorecard again, if we're comparing internal L&D to vendor partners, if you really want somebody who gets you, you know, really understands, really knows exactly what your company is all about, you can get that both ways as well. I will tell you that the vendor might take a little bit for them to get onboarded, but if you really think about it, it's no different than a new hire either. You're not going to hire somebody and have them completely get your organization right away. There is just a time period to it, and vendors are no different. If you want to know something that's truly innovative from a solution standpoint, you're probably going to lean more towards those vendor partners. They just have a broader base of experience. There's more voices, there's more just expertise that's coming in than if you have to hire just a small core team. So you do get that benefit as you start to work with vendors instead. If you want to be able to prioritize inside of your portfolio, so you want to be able to say, you know, these are the 10 items that we need to get done. These are the order in which I want them to get done, and this is the priority level. You can do that either way as well. So you could have multiple vendor teams or multiple vendors that you're working with. Inside of your own internal L&D, you can do that prioritization as well. So either of those options is going to work for you. If you want to have a single team to manage, again, you could do that either way. So we have a lot of customers who have dedicated teams where it is basically an extension of their organization. They just sit in a different office. They just have a different business card, if we still had business cards in this post-COVID world. So you can do it both ways, whether it's internal L&D or a vendor. And if you want to be able to manage complex, large projects simultaneously, there you're probably going to want to go with a vendor, or again, multiple vendors. Just because you'll have their dedicated focus, you'll be able to scale up. So a perfect example would be a big software implementation, any kind of a large launch that might be happening that's not outside of the typical norm of what your internal L&D department would do. You're probably going to want to work with a vendor partner for that, just because it's going to give you that flex to be able to grow, to meet that demand, and then you can shrink back down once that particular instance is over. So hopefully this helps you think through some of these options as you move into work without jobs. you're going to have to make some of these decisions of, do I want to take my internal L&D team and have them be more task-based? And that means that I'm probably going to have more different types of people to be able to do that. I'm going to have a graphics person. I'm going to have an audio person. I'm going to have a media developer. I'm going to have an instructional designer so that I can do more task-based work. Or do you instead go with a vendor partner who has all of those types of roles naturally inside of their organization? The next one that we're going to talk about is really the crux of what we're talking about here. So do you want to go from job roles, or do you want to be focused on tasks and projects? So when you have job roles, you know that all the tasks that you need are covered by those individuals because you've assigned them, you've aligned them to the job roles that are inside of your organization. Every person has very clear roles and responsibilities of what they need to be able to do. And so everybody knows what their job is. They come in the morning, they know what's expected of them, and they're able to move forward and complete those roles. I will say a downside is that oftentimes those people might be doing things that are outside of their job description. If another task is in that needs to get done, you're going to align it to either whoever's free or whoever best aligned, but it might not be the exact right fit based on the job roles that you've previously defined. So it does make it a little bit different that if your culture changes or your needs change, to be able to bend and flex those job roles to match. The biggest example of where we see that is automation. If you have somebody who was the person, again, who signed off on those time cards, as soon as automation comes into play and you don't need that anymore, what does that individual do if that was a part of their job role? Sometimes that means job elimination. Sometimes that just means pivoting them to something else that they can do. But that's one of the challenges that we face in this ever-changing world. And that's where sometimes you have to use the wrong person based on who's available. And so it's just being able to bend and flex with the people that you have at your fingertips. If you move more towards those tasks and projects, the word that immediately comes to mind is efficiency. You get a lot of efficiency from a cost perspective, particularly because you can align the right skilled person to the task so that you're spending appropriately to the level of effort. Tasking needs to be done for each project. So there is a little bit of effort making sure that you have people lined up for everything that needs to get done. It's why a lot of people, as they move to an agile methodology, will have scrum meetings in the morning to make sure that everybody's aligned with which tasks they're picking up, what they need to do. Everybody make sure that everything is covered. People are then defined by the tasks that they complete, but it's going to vary day to day. So there is an element of an identity crisis sometimes that comes in play when this occurs. So in particular, if you have that individual who was an instructional designer and did that end-to-end solution like we talked about before, and now they don't do that anymore, they just do kind of the chunk up front, you get a little bit of a challenge because you miss that sense of satisfaction. You don't get that same completion satisfaction, or being the one who pushes the publish button and sees the final result. You have to give up some of that control, and that's really hard sometimes for people. I will say that that's often difficult as well in that vendor relationship, because oftentimes you still want to have that input and that fingerprint on the project, and sometimes that can cause some delays as well. So it's really difficult. You need to make sure that people are focused on tasks that excite them. You need to kind of remap what people's roles are and how the value that they provide. So there's a whole lot of change management that comes into play as you move from job roles into tasks and projects, so that people still see value, so that they can reframe their purpose in the organization, and they still are excited to come to work. But the biggest benefit that you do get is that you can ensure and that you're accurately managing your costs. I think that's where a lot of organizations move into this, is because you can gain that efficiency and that cost efficiency, which is just a constant struggle that most organizations are under. So as we look at the scorecard for this particular topic, looking at job roles versus tax, which is the crux of the conversation that we're having here today. So if you want your team to be excited about the tasks and the projects that they're focused on, honestly, that's, moving to a task-based is going to be the right thing to do. And if you think about it, think about if you are currently in a job role or the last time that you were in a job role, there are parts of your job that you really like doing, and maybe there were parts of your job that you didn't. I'll go back to approving time cards or approving POs or anything that was just super kind of manual about it. It wasn't the thing that got me going. What gets me going is spending time with customers and getting to work with our teams and getting to create and solve for problems. So any of those very transactional type things were part of my job, but not necessarily something that I enjoyed. So when we move to more of that task-based model, those things are no longer tasks that I'm responsible for. I can really focus on the things that get me excited. I can focus on the places where I can add the most value, and it really makes for a better job, and a better experience. If you want to be able to manage costs, again, tasks is going to be the way to go, because you are aligning the person to the task, and so you can make sure that the cost and the level is associated with the level of effort. So you're not having a high-priced, highly trained instructional designer sitting and clipping audio and embedding it into the module. You have somebody else who, that's mainly their skill set, and based on that skill set, the cost is associated with that as well. So it really helps you conserve your costs. It helps you be more efficient and effective with your budget, which in the end gets you more results. It gets you more product out the door. If you want to make sure that somebody is not overqualified for what they're doing, not underqualified for the work that they're doing, again, tasks is going to be the right thing, because you're deciding based on every single activity and every single thing that needs to be done, who is the best person who's suited to do that. Now, depending on what your organization looks like, there may be mismatches here and there based on availability. But for the most part, you're able to align that to the right person and make sure that you have the right fit and you don't have any kind of square peg round hole type of situations. If you want your team to have a sense of security as to what their job looks like, I'm going to say with an asterisk to this, that job roles is going to be the better way of doing it. But what I will pivot it to is that your job role just needs to be redefined when you move to more of a task-based environment. So letting them know the types of tasks that they're going to be involved in, letting them know the parts of the project that they're going to be involved in, it's really helping them define what their days are going to look like, so that they have that sense of security of what's coming next, making sure that you're planning well in advance so that everybody knows exactly what they're going to be responsible for is key as well. Just because job security leads to job satisfaction, it reduces attrition. So just because we're moving to this new model where there's no job roles anymore, it doesn't mean that we can't still provide that sense of security. It's just going to look a little bit different. If you want to know exactly who's completing your projects on a day-to-day basis, again, job roles is going to probably be something that's going to be a little bit of a better fit for you. You're going to have that person on your team, and you're going to know that Dana is the person who's going to be responsible for this. When you move to more of a task-based sort of an experience, you might not even know who's doing parts of the project. Particularly as you work with vendors, you're not necessarily going to know, who is the person who's inputting your audio, who is the person who's editing your deck, who's the person who's doing the graphics. You may or may not meet those individuals. So if you're comfortable with that and you're comfortable with having a point of contact, but not necessarily knowing who else behind the scenes might be helping them, you'll honestly be fine. But if you really want to know exactly who is touching your content, exactly who is working on your project, then job roles is still going to be something that's right for you. Now, in the second half of this presentation, we're going to be talking more about those business outcomes. And so this isn't necessarily a decision or a choice between using an internal L&D or gig workers, using vendors or an internal L&D partner. This is really what are your priorities, and this is where you need to have a very solid understanding of what it is that you're looking for and what are the consequences of those decisions. So sometimes the consequences are all good, and you don't really have any problems at all that you need to be concerned about. Sometimes you just need to have an awareness of what that choice means. So if cost is something that you're looking for and that is really your primary focus, it means that you are going to work within a finite budget. If flexibility is something that you're wanting to do and that's really your priority, it means that you're looking to support as many projects as possible. It means that you want to be able to start projects whenever you want. You don't want to have any kind of limitations. And it means that you want to be able to add resources as needed to complete projects. And so you want that ultimate level of flexibility that the sky's the limit as much as your budget's going to be able to handle, that you want to be able to do it all, and really define what it is that it looks like on a day-to-day basis. So when you think about that, you really need to start thinking about what the different parameters are. So do you want high cost? Are you going to see a high cost, or are you going to see a high amount of flexibility? So if you utilize gig workers to complete your projects, you're going to see a little bit of a high cost, and you're going to see a little bit of a high flexibility. So you're going to get a lot of flexibility from the standpoint of you'll be able to use workers whenever you want, and you'll be able to bend and flex your team as needed and grow and expand as needed. But you're also going to wind up seeing a high cost associated with that, particularly when you're not able to commit to a person for 40 hours a week. You're going to see an increase in sometimes what that cost looks like, especially right now with the labor market where it's at. You're definitely going to be seeing some higher costs out there because it is a gig workers world. It is not an employer's world at this point in time. If you want to have if you have an internal L&D team, you're also going to be seeing a combination of both. So you're going to have that high flexibility of being able to have those workers that team do anything that you want them to do, but you're probably going to be seeing a little bit of a premium cost there as well, because you're going to have to hire for the highest level of activity that you want to do, even if there's some lower bandwidth things that you need them to do as well. If you use vendor partners, you're really going to be seeing more of that flexibility and less of that cost. That's where, and again, it's that whole task-based type workforce. That's what vendor partners have developed over the past 20, 30 years. They've really become incredibly efficient at that. They have job roles, but their job roles are defined by tasks. So each job role is assigned to, I am a project manager. My task is to have status meetings. My tasks are to do status reports. My tasks are to do project plans. I am an instructional designer, or learning experience architect. My tasks are to meet with the customer, to define the solution, to build out the storyboards, to build out the content. So you can see how inside of a vendor partner, we kind of have the best of both worlds. We have a very task-based environment, but all of those are wrapped into these new job roles where your job role is specific to the task that you provide. It gives a lot of flexibility because you do have a team that you can bend and flex and grow with, but it also reduces your costs because each of those task-based roles is aligned to the level of effort and what is required for that role. If you have talent-based projects with specific roles defined, and what that means is if, let's say I'm running a learning and development partner and department, and I have 10 people who report to me, and I have a unique position where I need to add one more person to my team, but I don't want to add them full-time. A lot of times people will reach out to either a recruitment firm, or they will reach out to a talent agency, or they'll reach out to a vendor and say, can you provide me with this subject matter expert for a period of 6 months to be able to augment my team to support some specific initiative that I have? That's what we're talking about, where it's a talent-based project. So it's you hiring talent with a specific role in mind. There, you're going to see a decrease in that flexibility because you've committed to that individual and you're responsible for kind of filling that person's dance card or filling up their day-to-day job with work. And you're going to be seeing the cost associated with that. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind as well. And let's say that you have task or project-based work where you use your internal team and vendors. And so this means that for each task, it's really defined by the end product of what you're going to be able to produce, and then it's broken out into individual tasks, which are then assigned to individual people. So there you're going to be able to see a much lower cost and a lot of increase in flexibility, because again, you can break those projects into smaller chunks, get the right people aligned to it, and be able to have that flexibility that you're looking for without that increased cost. So the last one that we're going to take a look at is cost versus speed. And this is really probably the ultimate question that a lot of people face is, am I really structured based on the cost? Do I want to be able to reduce my costs as much as possible? Do I want to manage my costs at a macro level? Or do I want that speed? And do I want to be able to just quickly create and deploy product? And if you ask anybody, the answer is yes. I want both. I want to have a low cost and I want to have a fast speed. And that's just something that is a challenge. I will tell you, you'll probably give up quality. If you're trying to push something really, really fast and you're trying to get it really, really cheap, there's always going to be something that bends. And unfortunately, quality is typically the part that falls to the bottom in those sorts of situations. So if you want to generate deliverables that are the highest quality, you are going to be looking at probably you're going to be looking at a bit of a lower cost, but you're not going to necessarily get them the fastest as possible. You can get great quality deliverables at a low cost, but it might be a little bit more methodical about it. It might be a couple of iterations or things that you want to be able to do to make sure it's the best quality possible. And it just means that you might not move as fast. If you're trying to deliver highest quality deliverables and fastest speed, you're definitely going to be seeing some increased costs there. If you want to be able to work in an agile manner with multiple iterations to bring a minimum viable product to the market, you're definitely going to be seeing that fast speed, but you may be seeing an increased cost. Now, and we actually do have another webinar later on this month talking about agile. If you do agile from the true definition of the word, you can get the best of both worlds. You can get that fast speed, you can get that low cost, but that's not how many people do it. And again, I'm not going to, spoiler alert, do anything about the webinar later on this month, but there's the right way of doing agile, and there's the way that many people are doing agile. That results in a lot of fast speed, but a lot of increased cost due to multiple iterations and this expectation that every iteration is perfect. If you have a fixed budget, you're going to be able to get that lower cost, and that's absolutely something that's possible. But again, you might be dealing with slower speeds, you might be more methodical about things. So it's just something to keep in mind that as you're looking to reduce that cost, you might be a little bit more concerned about timelines as you start to do that. If you want to be able to produce large programs in a short time span, you're definitely going to want to move towards that fast speed, but you're probably going to, again, see some increased costs in there as well. As you move things faster, you're going to have multiple people working at the same time. There might be some multiple iterations to be able to get it exactly where it needs to be, but you're going to be working towards that speed in those large programs. And then lastly, if you want to have the most cost-efficient resources aligned, you're going to go more towards that low cost. Again, you're going to have, so I'll give you a really concrete example on this one. Fastest speed is sometimes that internal L&D department. So that's where you, the instructional designer who's doing beginning to end, the end-to-end project, and you're paying for that instructional designer rate, regardless of whether that's the appropriate person for what the task is. And again, we use this example a couple of times of narration and importing audio. So if you want to be able to have the most cost-efficient resources, then there's going to be review cycles, and there's going to be handoffs, and there's going to be transitions from one more person to another as they move from task to task, which just decreases your speed a little bit. It's usually not super noticeable, but it is something to just be aware of, that there is a difference between having the person inside of your office who's doing the beginning and end versus having somebody who is the most appropriate person aligned to that particular task, so that you get that cost efficiency that you're looking And the last one that we have is cost versus control. So when we cost want to work within a finite budget, and control is really where a lot of people struggle, especially in a gig workforce, especially with task-based. You lose some of that control of being able to talk to your team whenever it's convenient, know exactly what's being worked on at any moment, hand select the talent that's supporting you. So if you want to be able to talk to your team whenever you want, you're going to be looking for more of that high control. If you want to know exactly what's being worked on and when, again, you're going to want to be looking for that high control. If you want to be able to hand select the people that are working on your projects, we're still sitting there in high control. And oftentimes that means in those three situations, you may be sacrificing cost of having dedicated people or dedicated teams or internal teams that you're doing to be able to have that level of control. If you want to have the right people aligned to each task, you're going to want to you can move towards a lower cost, but you're going to give up just a little bit of that control. Not saying that you have the wrong people, but it might not be exactly the person that you would have selected. It might not be the person that you're used to having do it. You're going to just have different people assigned to different tasks in different parts of your situation. And if you want everything to look as if you did it yourself, you're going to want that control, which means, again, you're not going to be able to enjoy some of those lower costs. So at the end of the day, this is really the message, is that when you move to a task-based workforce and you move away from job roles, you're going to be able to get a lot of efficiencies from a cost perspective. You're going to give up a lot of control. And that may be very, very difficult if you don't go in with eyes wide open of what you're trying to do and you're not 100% clear and crisp on what your outcomes are that you're looking for. If you're looking for that high control, if you're looking to be able to know exactly what and when is going to be worked on, if you're looking for things to look exactly the way that you've always done it, then you might not be ready. But it doesn't mean that that's forever. So I think it's something that a lot of people go through a maturation process. A lot of people go through a change management process to get to where they need to be. And that's really honestly where I've spent my last 15 years, is helping guide customers through that process and get them to the other side where they're getting the best of both worlds. They have a vendor team that supports them, understands them, acts as an extension of their team, really gets them, and the end product is exactly what they were looking for, but they're getting a lot of those efficiencies, a lot of that ability to expand, a lot of the benefits that you get from a gig worker. They're getting all of those benefits. It's just a journey to get there. And so I think having that awareness of what outcomes you're looking for, what that journey is going to look like, is a critical path in this conversation. So we don't know what's on the horizon. We don't know if robots are really going to take over the world. It might happen. If it's based on the robot that's inside of the grocery store right now who kind of cleans up, I think we're safe for a while, but who knows? But regardless of what the future looks like, we just need to make sure that we're keeping those business objectives in mind. And we just need to make sure that we're keeping that focus and not just jumping on the latest innovation or the coolest craze or what everybody's talking about if it's not aligned to what it is that we're looking to get out of it. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Nolan to see if we have any questions. So Nolan?
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. The first one we have here was, do you have some, I mean, I think in the webinar you showcased many examples of what the ideal scenario is. We had a couple questions that were centered around, like, do you have examples of what happened when you got it wrong? You know, when somebody said, you know, or when somebody came to us, or maybe on a project you were working on that used maybe gig workers versus an internal team. Do you have any examples of that and really what that led to?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest challenge that we experience from a gig worker perspective is the timelines and the communication. So with a gig worker, you can't always guarantee that they're going to be available when you need them to be. And so I think that's the most frustrating thing that our customers might experience, is if you're not very clear upfront with your expectations from a timeline perspective, you're not clear in your expectations from a communication perspective. Gig workers can tend to be a little bit of a black hole where you send them an email and you're looking for something and you don't get a response. And so it really is a lot of one of the things that we do and we focus on is making sure that those communication protocols are in place. Making sure that we have a daily check-in where we just find out, okay, what's your current status? There's a lot more management that goes into it to make sure that everything is moving forward. The other challenge is, from a gig worker perspective, is if you're an organization looking to hire your own gig worker, they can walk away at any time. And I think that's one of the biggest frustrations that a lot of customers face when they're doing their own contracting, is that those individuals that they're contracting on a Tuesday can decide, this job really isn't for me, so I'm done. And there's nothing that you can honestly do to keep them there or keep them. And that's where sometimes getting those gig workers through a vendor partner who has a whole network, that when that does happen, they're able to say, okay, well, this person is leaving, but by Thursday, we can be able to replace them with one of these 4 candidates. It gives you a little bit more of that security. So I will say that those are probably the 2 biggest examples that I can give of some of the challenges that we face with gig workers, is that communication and scheduling, because they may have 5 or 6 other customers that they're dealing with. And unlike when you have a vendor team where you have a project manager who's managing those people's schedules to make sure everything gets done, not every gig worker is the best project manager for their own workload. And then the second piece is just, if they decide that they get another opportunity, then you're kind of left in a lurch, because they don't have the same requirements of, a waiting period where they have to give you 2 weeks notice or 3 months notice or what have you. They don't have those same requirements. And so sometimes you're kind of stuck in a lurch. And that's where working with a partner to bring in those gig workers will benefit you, because they have a backlog and they have a network that they can depend on. And that's not something that becomes your problem, that becomes somebody like ours.
Yeah, and I work in a WeWork type office space that's built and mostly for entrepreneurs and innovators and things like that. And it's funny how many conversations that are had from the people who said, when I started off with, I found somebody on Fiverr, or I found somebody on Guru.com, because I needed something done, and I didn't really know
Yeah.
where to turn, and it worked for them there. But then they always say, like, we kind of outgrew that. Like, now the stakes are high. We have we have people on our platform. We have investments that are made. And so we're still looking for that model. And I think that's where, not to turn that into a sales pitch necessarily, but I think that's where a lot of companies, like and value Infopro, is because it gives them that, with some of our talent models, it gives them that ability to have kind of that gig worker feel, where you're only paying for the work that gets done, but you're not dealing with, a 5-star rating system on on Guru.com or Fiverr. So yeah,
No.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example would be, with a gig worker, there's no skin in the game for them. If they walk away from that job, then they're just going to go down the street and they're going to find the next job that's there. When you work with a vendor like Infopro, we have a lot of skin in that game. We want to keep them as a customer. We have service level metrics that we have to meet. We have master services agreements and requirements. And so it falls into that best of both worlds, that you get a lot of the control that you would want, but a lot of the flexibility that you need. So I think that's the kind of the best way of putting it.
And then I have another question. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it, but it's about cost. So they're saying, the question is, how much more expensive is going through an intermediary like Infopro versus going directly to like a, Fiverr.com, Guru.com, right? Because as you've mentioned here, there is a trade-off, right? Everything you
There
can't
is.
have the best of both worlds. I don't know if there's any, I know it's a tough one to answer, but is there some rough idea we can give to the audience, because it was asked 2 or 3 times?
So there's a couple of different parameters to consider. I will say that yes, if you're contracting directly with off of a website and you're contracting that person directly, the cost will be lower from an upfront cost perspective. But you are then managing that person. You're managing that person's invoices. You're troubleshooting if that person's not working out and finding those replacements. And so when you do see the cost that's additional from a vendor, it's not it's not because we want to increase that cost. It's because there's other things that we're providing as a value. So you get project management with that. You get somebody who you can escalate to, who can help you solve the problem. You get a team who's able to provide you with support with that individual. And so that's the trade-off that you have. And so yes, you might see, and you'll see an increase in cost, but you'll also see a decrease in frustration. You'll see a decrease in what's required of you. And so that's kind of the thing. So you really have three different parameters. You can hire an individual where you have that significant commitment and the ultimate responsibility to that person. You can do the gig worker, which is going to be a slight increase in cost, because they're going to raise their rates and they're going to charge whatever they want to charge, and it can change on a weekly basis sometimes. And you're going to see that, and based on the size of the engagement, you're going to see that cost, and you're still going to have that responsibility to manage that individual. When you go with a vendor, like Infopro, what we have is we can sometimes do volume buys where we'll book the person for 40 hours. We might make that person actually an employee of ours. And then you're just paying for the portion of their day that you're using. And so sometimes we can get some cost efficiencies for you there where it is actually a little bit less than what you would be paying that gig worker. But then we also take on that responsibility to manage that person and help you ensure that you're successful.
Right. So it seems like it's like really the name of the game comes down to total cost of ownership
Yes,
and how
exactly.
you want to place those and where you want to have those cards fall, if you would. And another question that we have is in regards to, is there a strategy in place? A lot of people have said, we're almost being forced to hire contingent labor, like a contractor, and maybe not necessarily like a gig worker, but like a contractor for 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is, until we can actually find somebody to fill this role. And people have said, is that a good strategy? Is that something we recommend? Is that something that's successful until you can find maybe the perfect candidate going with a contractor or consultant who might not be wanting to work as a full-time person right away?
As long as that's the person's intent, it's actually a reasonable solution. So it's a solution that I've often done it's almost like kind of like lease to own, if you think about a car. It allows both that person to figure out if they fit into your culture and you to figure out if they're the right fit for you. So if you do that contractor but making sure that that's what they want long term, because again, if you go back to total cost of ownership, keeping somebody as a contractor where you're hiring them directly for a prolonged period of time isn't going to be as cost efficient as having somebody be a contractor and then turning them into a full-time employee if that's your end game. Where contractors are going to be beneficial is if you don't know that your needs are going to be consistent. You don't know what you're going to want next year or the year after that, or you have a very defined window of what you need. That's where those contractors are going to really benefit you, is because you'll be able to very easily, kind of turn that individual off of your network as soon as you're done with that particular requirement. But a lot of times, being able to try someone is a great way to figure out also what you're looking for if you're looking to hire. It helps you kind of figure out what you don't want. Sometimes is if you get somebody and they're not really a great fit, that's just something else to think about too.
Perfect. Well, I'll prevent asking one more question. I don't want to keep people over. We just got 5 minutes left. Thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. Those that have not had the opportunity to meet with Sherry yet, she is an open book, loves to talk about these things, whether it's this topic or any other topic. I'm highly encourage you to check out her LinkedIn and follow her on LinkedIn. And if you'd like specific advice, I'm sure she'd be happy to have a conversation with you as well. So please do feel free to connect with Sherry. She's on LinkedIn. If you search her name, you can find her there. If you are, as Sherry said, if you are interested in talent, if you're kind of struggling with trying to get some projects done, and whether you're looking for a company to traditionally outsource, or you're looking for something kind of in between with more flexibility, definitely a solution we provide. Feel free to reach out to us on any of these channels here below. Thank you again for joining the webinar. We will share the recording traditionally within 2 days, might be 3 with the weekend coming up. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend ahead.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone. Have a good one. Goodbye.